Monsters have come to represent the face of our fears and have captured our collective imagination since the beginning of time. Like our fears, they come in all shapes and sizes and meet us in our nightmares. These monsters can be physical manifestations of evil, spectral presences that hold secrets to the past, serve as metaphors that reflect our current anxieties, or they can be used as cautionary tales about the effects of man's meddling with the natural order, a consequence for our own hubris. Film has been the perfect medium to bring these mythical creatures to life, allowing filmmakers the opportunity to explore the darker corners of their minds and help create the iconic representations that we will forever associate with these movie monsters.
Hey, what's up you guys? I'm Jeremy. Thanks so much for coming by to check out the video. On this episode, we're going to be talking about one of my favorite movie monsters, dragons. To be honest, I've not traditionally thought of them as quote-unquote monsters. I mean, I wouldn't consider a unicorn a monster, but for the sake of the series, just go with me. Their portrayal can vary. Some are good, some are evil, some are mindless beasts bent on destruction, while some are intelligent creatures that are capable of speaking fluent English. It always seems to be English. This video is going to dive into some of the most notable films featuring these mythic movie monsters. And just so you know, if you enjoy this video, there are tons of other episodes you can check out. I'll put a link below. Anyways, as with most of the subjects in the series, legends of this creature go back thousands of years. But the word itself originated in the 13th century as a variation on the Latin word draconum and the Greek word drakon, both which roughly translate to big serpent. In Western culture, the devil has been referred to as both a serpent and a dragon, and to that end, Dracula, as in Vlad Dracula's family sigil, was the Order of the Dragons, so there's long been a correlation between dragons and evil. Versions of them exist all over the world in almost every culture. But that means it's kind of difficult for historians to pinpoint their exact origin. It's possible that because of humans' innate fear of snakes, and even further back, apes' fear of snakes, large birds of prey, and other predatory animals, that dragons are a byproduct of evolution. Others theorize that the legends themselves were born from the discovery of dinosaur bones. In fact, there are Chinese medicines derived from prehistoric fossils that are referred to as dragon bones. But it can't be that simple. The first civilizations didn't have dinosaurs in that region, yet legends still existed. So, what do you think about the origins of the dragon legend? Let me know down below. Anyways, to keep this concise, we're going to mostly focus on the origins of Western European dragons, because the ones we see in most fantasy films throughout the years can be traced back to medieval times. Not the restaurant, sadly, they can't afford that kind of production. Wouldn't that be badass though? Like an animatronic dragon flies out and cooks your mutton for you. It was the Middle Ages between the 11th and 13th century that people were the most interested in dragons as living creatures. Turns out the people of that day were into all sorts of fucked up shit, and in retrospect, dragons were way less of a concern than the Roman Catholic Church. Seriously, do you see these pictures? That is horrifying and gross. And what the fuck is going on there? The first known image of a modern Western dragon dates all the way back to around 1260. The Golden Legend is a collection of stories that were widely read throughout Western Europe. One tells the story of Saint Margaret of Antioch, a virgin martyr that was tortured for her faith, before being thrown into a cell to rot. There, she's visited by a dragon that tries to eat her, but at the last minute she's able to draw her crucifix, causing it to vanish. This aversion to crosses may have carried over to vampire lore, but I'm not sure about that. In another, titled St. George and the Dragon, written in the 11th century, but adapted from a legend that dates back all the way to the 6th, a serpent repeatedly raids a small town, pillaging its sheep until there are none left for it before moving on to the town's children. The villagers, being the punk-ass bitches that they were, eventually had to start offering their own children until the king's daughter is picked in a lottery. He contested, but his daughter was dressed in a gown and chained to a rock beside the lake where the beast dwelled anyway. St. George arrives at the rock as the demon emerges. He drives his lance into the serpent, and with a cross he subdues it and brings it into town. Upon arriving, he tells the villagers if they convert to Christianity, he'll slay the dragon. They do, and he does. Christianity. Hey, it's better than dying. When I was doing my research, I stumbled across something that I found pretty interesting and worth noting, and that's the differences between dragons, drakes, wyverns, worms, and basilisks. Obviously, and with any fictional character, it does depend on what you're reading and how the writer chose to identify them. In most stories though, wyverns are smaller than dragons and generally don't have any magical abilities. No fire, poison breath, anything like that. They're often imagined in a natural form, 2 legs, 2 wings, like a scaled bird. When I learned this, it occurred to me that Hollywood seemed to be using the physical traits of wyverns, and that's appropriation. And I'm triggered as fuck. Matter of fact, let's just pause this for a second so I can log into Twitter and boom, history has been canceled. You're welcome. In Norse mythology, dragons are referred to as serpents, which translates to worm. In some fiction, though, worm is used to describe a dragon of almost godlike scale and ability. Dragons are usually said to be large and powerful, and have magical abilities like the ability to breathe fire or ice. Their bodies usually have 4 legs as well as wings, in most literature anyways. Drake can be used as a blanket term for either dragons or wyverns. A basilisk is a serpent that was birthed from a cock egg. Yep, a snake-chicken hybrid. But of course, there are many different variations, including this guy from the Harry Potter series. In Greek mythology, Hercules had to defeat the Hydra, a massive serpent with many heads, and if you cut off one, 2 grow back in its place. Again, none of these attributes are definitive, but I wanted to at least try to clarify. The way I see it, and this is per me and not any book, dragon is a blanket term that can apply to any of these creatures, i.e. all wyverns are dragons, but not all dragons are wyverns. There's a bit of context, now let's talk about the movies.
Everyone loves Disney, right? Despite the fact that Mickey Mouse is the new head of the Galactic Empire, there's something about that title card that really does hit me right in the feels. Even if most are animated, the fact remains that Disney is at least partially responsible for keeping dragons in popular culture. 1941's The Reluctant Dragon features, well, I'm not sure that reluctant's the word I'd use for him. I wonder if he got the same kind of backlash as LeFou did. Either way, he's the first dragon to ever appear on film. In 1959, Sleeping Beauty introduced us to Maleficent, an evil sorceress able to take the form of a giant fire-breathing demon dragon. Pretty scary stuff for a kids movie, but not unlike other Disney animated movies. In fact, the whole villain turns into a giant monstrous version of themselves, and the final conflict sort of becomes a staple. In 1963's The Sword in the Stone, Merlin has a magical duel with Mad Madam Mim. It's a fun sequence that has both these magic wielders shape-shifting into a bunch of cute little woodland creatures until she decides she's tired of playing fair. Pete's Dragon introduced us to Elliot, a clumsy yet lovable creature with the ability to go invisible. He befriends a young boy and the two become besties. This 1977 picture was an animation live-action hybrid, similar in technique to Who Framed Roger Rabbit. 1997's super stylish and stylized Hercules has a Hydra with hundreds of heads. In what's easily the most epic scene in the movie, he's swinging his sword, lobbing heads off, and more are just coming back in its place. It's actually really exciting, and surprisingly brutal for a Disney movie. I don't know, you gotta admit there's something kinda crazy about seeing blood splatter out of this thing's neck holes. Enchanted is a legit charming satire on the Disney formula. Amy Adams is the perfect princess. She feels like she stepped out of a Disney cartoon and into this film, and Susan Sarandon as the evil sorceress is every bit as good. She's a spin on Maleficent's character, and true to form, you know where things are headed. The cast itself is worth the price of admission. In 2016, the studio decided it was time to dust off Pete's Dragon for a live-action remake. Not sure who was clamoring for that, but what do I know? The movie actually did its own thing, as opposed to just retelling the exact same story, which is what they seem to be doing lately with their live-action remakes. So it's commendable. I didn't particularly care for the movie, but hey, they tried. Alright, those are just some of the many contributions that Disney's made to keeping fairy tales and dragons in the cultural lexicon. Felt like I needed to shout them out, and now that we got that out of the way, we can move on. Alright, let's start this thing off with 1958's Seventh Voyage of Sinbad. It's the first entry into the Sinbad trilogy, which was conceptualized by Ray Harryhausen, the legendary stop-motion artist whose work can be seen in movies like The Beast from 20 Fathoms, Mysterious Island, 1 Million Years BC, and my personal favorite, Clash of the Titans. It's also the first live-action movie to ever depict a dragon named Taro, and he has an extended and really awesome battle against the Cyclops. It takes place inside of a cave as well as out on the shore of this island, and it's really fucking neat to watch. I've always loved this medium.
Seventh Voyage was a precursor to Jason and the Argonauts, which was released in 1963. That movie features a really great Hydra that showcases the advancements in stop motion. I mean, moving one head has gotta be a daunting task, but animating around a dozen is pretty insane. And while it's easy to admire the effort that went into achieving the effect, the technique has mostly went out of fashion in favor of a more integrated approach to creating movie magic, at least for the most part. In 1981, film got its first true dragon antagonist in Dragon Slayer, Vermithrax Pejorative. Pretty cool name. It's a ruthless and cunning dragon that lives deep in a cave. Look at him. As amazing as CGI is, this is a gigantic dragon that literally breathes fire. How dope is that? He's a mix of stop motion, puppetry, and animatronics. His physical presence, paired with the film's stark design and bleak direction, create a truly terrifying movie monster. Dragon Slayer is actually a Disney movie that goes dark, like surprisingly dark. It's crazy what could pass for PG in 1981. I remember being pretty disturbed as a kid when a couple of baby dragons are found gnawing on the limbs of the dead princess. Narratively, this movie takes its influence from St. George and the Dragon, which I mentioned earlier. Technically, this wasn't stop motion, it was a process called go motion, which incorporates motion blur into each frame involving motion and reduces the choppiness. This technique was co-developed by ILM and Phil Tippett, the dude that would go on to work as the dino consultant in the Jurassic Park series. Remember a minute ago when I said that stop motion had fallen out of favor? Well, director Larry Cohen obviously missed the memo with 1982's Q the Winged Serpent. To be fair, Clash of the Titans was 81, but this ain't Harryhausen level effects. It looks like a 12-year-old did this shit with Play-Doh and iMovie. But it's actually a B-movie. In some ways, it's an American riff on the kaiju genre. Speaking of kaiju, I did an entire video dedicated specifically to them, so if you want to learn a little more about it, check the description or click the link. In Q, it's an ancient Aztec god that's flying around New York City eating people. This hustler finds the beast lair on the top of the Chrysler building and decides he's going to use the information to extort the city for millions of dollars. Oh yeah, and David Carradine's in it as a cop. Now I see I've piqued your interest. Randall William Cook did the subpar stop motion for the Winged Serpent, and while he wouldn't be taking home any awards for this one, don't feel too bad. He'd later go on to work with Peter Jackson on the Lord of the Rings trilogy and bring home an Oscar for his work in Return of the King. The Never-Ending Story, released in 1984, is a classic fantasy film. This isn't a movie that's devoid of its own darker moments, but it still tends to skew a little bit closer to a contemporary children's fantasy than some grim medieval legend like Dragon Slayer. And yet, it still isn't afraid to have real stakes and truly heart-wrenching and occasionally terrifying moments. Like, Artax drowning in a sinkhole. It tells the story of a young boy named Bastian that escapes bullies and grief into the pages of a vast fantasy novel and into a world known as Fantasia. Within that story exists a warrior child named Atreyu that's tasked with saving the childlike empress from a force known as the Nothing. Atreyu meets Falkor, the luck dragon. Falkor is a character that viewers immediately fell in love with. He's so emotive. He conveys so many expressions and moves so naturally. He's a puppet that took upwards of 25 people to articulate, and when I'm watching it, I never see him as anything less than a living, breathing creature. Wolfgang Petersen directed the film, and the special effects were created by Brian Johnson, another wonderful children's film that we may never see the likes of again. The 80s were a really good time for fantasy though. 1988's Willow is another prime example. It's a Lucasfilm production that was led by Ron Howard with a story by George Lucas. It stars Warwick Davis and Val Kilmer and Kevin Pollak. It's about a dwarf that stumbles upon a child that was prophesized to overthrow an evil queen. Dwarf adopts baby, befriends a warrior, and sets out on an unexpected journey. Mad Mardigan. See, that's how you name a character, J.K. Rowling. Toward the end of the film, Willow accidentally turns this troll into a creature called the Ebersisk. It's a massive fireball-spitting, two-headed dragon-like monster, another creature that was brought to life by Go Motion. And I'm not gonna lie, those heads sorta look like two VD-ridden schlongs. Yeah, probably too much there. For almost a decade, there were really no notable releases featuring our mythical winged friends. But then suddenly, after the release of Jurassic Park, a new world of opportunity opened up to filmmakers. Now, with the advent of sophisticated CGI, anything is possible. Enter 1996's Dragonheart, directed by Rob L. Cohen. This one stars Dennis Quaid and Sean Connery, voicing Draco the Dragon. It's about an odd couple consisting of a dragon and a dragon slayer that decide to overthrow a tyrannical king that happens to share a heart with the creature. It's actually a little more convoluted than that, but who really gives a shit? It's pretty good, I guess. Yeah, that's about the best praise I can give it, short of just commending its awesome looking effects, and Sean Connery's a pretty cool dragon. Draco is a sophisticated dragon that enjoys singing more than eating people, yet even with all that practice, he's still completely tone deaf. Speaking of tone deaf, it's hard to tell who this movie's for. That said, in terms of Draco, he really is one of the best. ILM is again responsible for the at the time amazing effects, and it paved the way for some more truly awesome dragons, which we'll be getting to shortly. Yeah, Dungeons and Dragons. A steaming pile of dragon dung. I mean, this is the dragon from Dungeons and Dragons, and this movie came out how many years after Dragonheart? Trash. It looks like it was made for like $10,000 for the Sci-Fi Channel. Why would you take such a beloved IP and just disrespect it like this? I mean, think about the potential that you have with a Dungeons and Dragons story. Luckily, word is there's another one in the works, so fingers crossed. Alright, we've already spent too much time on this shit movie. Let's go ahead and move on. 2002's Reign of Fire is badass. Matthew McConaughey and Christian Bale battle fucking dragons. I'm so in. It happens to take place in a post-apocalyptic wasteland that's been overrun by a vicious race of fire-breathing dragons. Two different factions of humans work together to try to take back the Earth from the brink of extinction. It was the secret lab that was responsible for bringing these winged baddies to life, but for some reason this was their last project. Not sure why. These are some mean-looking motherfuckers, and their design was a combination of snakes, leopards, lions, eagles, hawks, vultures, and crocodiles. And they added some cool flourishes to the design as well. If I'm not mistaken, this is the first time I saw the depiction of the dragon where an accelerant comes out of their mouths almost like snake venom before the flames ignited. The dogfight scene's pretty awesome too, and so's this shot where the dragon's like creeping up to the side of the castle. That's some iconic fantasy shit. Lord of the Rings transported audiences across the globe to another world. I grew up on the animated Rankin and Bass versions, but obviously this is some next level shit. Middle-earth is a place that's full of strange and mysterious creatures and races, and we're introduced to dozens. But the winged steeds that are rode by the Nazgul are the ones that we're interested in for the sake of this video. Monstrous creatures that are referred to as felled beast. They're wyverns with snake-like heads, and they don't appear to have scales or armor. They lack the ability to breathe fire, but they do, however, have the ability to strike deep fear into anyone that sees them. Obviously, I would shit my pants if I saw one of those. In a trilogy that's stuffed with so much imagination and so many fantastical elements, these creatures still manage to make an impact. Middle-earth was brought to life thanks to some great locations in New Zealand and the effects wizardry of Weta Workshop. There's few series out there that have the same amount of fan devotion as Lord of the Rings, but Harry Potter is without a doubt one of them. Like Lord of the Rings, it's steeped in its own mythology and exists in a fantastical world that's captured the imaginations of kids everywhere. The series is full of fantastic beasts, and in The Chamber of Secrets, the second film in the series, which was directed by Chris Columbus, we're introduced to what may be the creepiest creature in the series, the 1,000-year-old serpent known as the Basilisk. The Basilisk was brought to life using mostly CGI for the wide shots, but the studio also relied on some old school movie magic, and in the close-ups you can see that Harry's actually interacting with animatronics. Goblet of Fire, the fourth film, featured a Hungarian horntail? A Hungarian horntail? It sounds like a euphemism for a dick. Anyways, it shows up during the Tri-Wizard tournament. I really don't know what that is. In fact, I really don't know much about this franchise at all. Sorry Potterheads, I'm in over my head. In 2007, audiences took a tour deep into the uncanny valley with Robert Zemeckis' Beowulf. This is a movie shot in the same style as The Polar Express. It's an ugly CGI movie that's aged about as well as old milk. With its dead-eyed characters that look like corpses and its poke-you-in-the-eye 3D gimmick and execution, it's a really hard film to enjoy. There's a pretty great scene where Beowulf fights Grendel naked, but other than that, not a lot to glom onto. I respect that Zemeckis wanted to do something different, but, different doesn't always equal better. Sony Pictures and special effects supervisor Jerome Chen were responsible for the look of this film, which plays about as well as a cutscene from a PlayStation 2 game. Beowulf has a fantastic cast, and it's a retelling of a Norse legend which inevitably leads to a battle with a dragon who turns out to be Beowulf's son. Like I said, it's just unpleasant. From the design to the senseless Mortal Kombat level of violence, this is a movie that needs to be left back in 2007. I've always looked at DreamWorks as like second tier when it comes to animated features. Their movies like Shrek and Kung Fu Panda are pretty good, but they're not like Pixar good. So when I saw the trailers for How to Train Your Dragon, I thought, cool, kids will probably like that. Turns out though, so did I. How to Train Your Dragon is a 2010 movie that at its core is a boy and his dog story, not dissimilar to Pete's Dragon. This series is now 3 entries strong, and it's one of the best animated trilogies ever next to, Toy Story and stuff like that. It showcases dozens of different species. Toothless, a Night Fury in particular, is a great design. It's unique while still being easy to recognize. The designers did go on to say that he's half cat and half dog in his behavior and mannerisms, and once you know that, you can really tell. So whether you're a dog lover, a cat lover, or a dragon lover, I think you're probably going to enjoy How to Train Your Dragon. Ladies and gentlemen, at this time, I'd like to reintroduce you to Hollywood and literature's most iconic dragon, Smaug, a most specially greedy, strong, and wicked worm. If you're like myself, then Smaug is the first name that comes to your mind when you hear the word dragon. As I mentioned earlier, I did grow up on the Rankin Bass Hobbit, and even as a cartoon character, he was terrifying. Bilbo may not have known what to expect, but I sure did. I knew what was coming, and I waited in anticipation to see this legendary serpent in all of his glory. But he wouldn't even be making an appearance until 2013's The Desolation of Smaug. Look, say what you want about the trilogy, but there's no one that's going to tell me that Smaug isn't the greatest dragon in the history of film. He looks amazing. God, they could not have done him any better. And props to Benedict Cumberbatch for whatever that is. I crack up every time I see it. The end of Desolation during the confrontation between he and the dwarves is super entertaining. I mean, it's really elaborate, but it makes for really great visuals. The shot where he gets coated in gold and then shakes it all off is just so badass. And then the devastation that he causes to Lake Town at the beginning of Five Armies just shows how powerful this antagonist is. I just wish the scene would have been at the end of the second movie. What a weird decision it was to end on a cliffhanger and then start the third movie with what's arguably the high point of the entire trilogy. Regardless of that, Smaug, you win my personal award for the most badass dragon in film. And that counts for something. Alright, one more before we go. Sort of a bonus round, if you will. In the past, I've steered clear of discussing TV shows in the series. The reason's pretty simple. This ain't TV monsters. That said, I cannot in good conscience talk about dragons without talking about the mother of motherfucking dragons, Daenerys Targaryen and her 3 children. In 2011, Game of Thrones premiered on HBO. It's based on George R.R. Martin's sprawling and still incomplete A Song of Ice and Fire. The show wasn't an overnight success, but as its dragons grew, so did its viewers. Seriously, if you've had enough time to watch this video, but you can't find the time to watch Game of Thrones, your priorities are fucked. In the finale of Season 1 and after the death of Aquaman and her unborn child, Daenerys carries her 3 dragon eggs into a funeral pyre, content to die. Yet she emerges from the flames. Her fossilized dragon eggs have hatched, and in that moment, she officially becomes the mother of dragons. Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion are the name of her dragons, and they're the last of their kind. But due to legends and even remains, we know that dragons existed in the known world for thousands of years. I love dragons, made a whole video to say as much, and I will say with no hesitation that Game of Thrones is my favorite entry on the list. Season 8 is gonna be the end of an era, but with a prequel already in production, expect to see dragons soar across the screen for years to come. Alright you guys, thank you so much for stopping by to check out this edition of Movie Monsters. If you enjoyed the video, do me a favor, take just a second to smash that little thumbs up button right there. It lets me know that you appreciate all the work that goes into these videos. And if you want to check out even more episodes of Movie Monsters, then check down in the description, I'll post links, and subscribe if you want to stay up to date with all of the terrible content, including podcasts, movie reviews, movie monsters, and more. I'm Jeremy, and until next time, be terrible.